You know what? I agree. We probably shouldn't talk about it in front of other people. We need to borrow money, but Tom's a princess. What? Yeah. No. Look, everyone who thinks that my career is thriving. Okay. I'm good. Okay. I hurt my elbow a little bit. In my face. Oh, my wife just asked. I've been trying, but it's embarrassing. It makes me feel like a failure. Nobody bought my last book. But the first 2 pages were so good. I don't have enough life. When I was the A student, right? I'm the one who went to Ivy League school. Oh, poor now. Almost 40 and flipping supermarket coupons. All my younger brothers tries to magazine about private jets. I don't subscribe to Tom. I should not for free. Every month we fall further behind. And 3 kids are not cheap. I'm sorry that you're going through this, but you are not the only one who's struggling. There's no competition. And we could really use the help. Well, we could also use the help. I thought you said it's not a competition. Well, Marina, you're a corporate lawyer, and I'm a public school teacher, and my savings account is a mug. I'm not working anymore, and you two have dual income, and we just got Tom's $12 royalty checks. Sorry, we don't have dual income anymore because I lost my job last week. They fired you from the school thing? Do you even know what I do? Yes. Like a child guidance research counsel. I'm a therapist for low-income at-risk kids. Yeah, more. That's what I do. I wish I knew you were employed before I asked for a loan. I feel like a jerk. Oh, I'm sorry that the timing of my getting laid off was inconvenient for you. That sounds like us. Or family. Okay? I can put you up. Connor, I don't want your money, okay? Not from big pharma, fossil fuels, or blood diamond. Okay. But Tom shouldn't get it either. Whoa! That's the help he had to. How is that not toxic? Oh, well, the golden boy hit his first speed bump and immediately asked for a bailout? He went for a rich rush? I'm sorry, I'm your dad. Please, for once, just not fight. I don't think that's possible. I've been asking for 13 years. Honestly, it's a good thing that we're canceling Thanksgiving. Oh, no! How am I supposed to survive without your fake turkey? You said you liked it! I lied! I can still feel it in my mouth! Come on! You're supposed to have it! Oh, my God, this is horrible. What was horrible? What is weekend? You've been acting weird all day.
Shalom, Rabbi Hart. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
How are you doing? Everything okay?
Yeah, doing okay. How about you?
Good. Enjoying the weather finally. This is the worst day for a Zoom ever. But yes.
Right. Yeah, it was glorious today and yesterday.
Yeah. How are you doing personally also?
Chicago's great in the summer. You've been through the worst. It's just good now.
I know it's such a
hot.
beautiful city also. Really is truly beautiful in winter also, but summer it's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal, and it transforms. It's a different city. The energy, the people. I mean, it's COVID now, so we'll see exactly what happens. But it's just a wonderful place when the weather's
I
good.
think that people, based on what I heard last September, people claimed our summer was stolen from us. I think they are looking forward, waiting for the minute they can do something. So it's hard to see it not happening.
I think that's right. Right. The beaches were even, I think, closed in Chicago, which is...
yeah, I know. We came in September, so we still had good weather when we came, but it was really when the things were, some were open, some were closed, but most things were closed.
Yeah. Okay, very good. People are joining on. Welcome, everyone. These are so... Daniel, what's the proper title for you, by the way?
Consul for Public Diplomacy.
Counsel Daniel Aschheim, or?
Consul, you can call me Daniel, but yeah, Consul for Public Diplomacy.
Okay.
That's the official title, but Daniel when you talk to me.
Okay. So we'll begin with about a 15-20 minute tech for Yom Hashoah. And then we'll transition to the update and maybe even beginning, what Yom HaShoah means in Israel and how it's commemorated there could be a nice way to segue.
No problem. And it will be questions, right? I'm going to be asked questions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we could start with questions. We could have questions running through the chat, or you could begin with your own, like just a briefing, things that you think are
What are the
important.
things that you would like me to focus on? What you wrote? I had written here from what I got as notes: COVID, elections, peace and with neighbors. I can talk about everything, but I want to make it interesting for the audience. So I can start with giving a bit of my talk, and then we can open it for maybe you asking me or them asking me, whatever.
Yeah, let's do it from the community, and we'll have it in the chat.
Okay,
We'll ask people to put questions in the chat, and I'll kind of
good.
collect them, and I'll moderate.
Okay,
So I'll
great.
select questions.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're doing this jointly tonight with Anshe Shalom, B'nai Israel, which is I think a community right near you in Lakeview.
Next to me, yeah.
Yeah,
It's also weird. The fact is that we are living still in these black cubes. I mean, I'm speaking to synagogues communities every day, but I'm completely disoriented. I can speak
yeah,
to someone in Minnesota, Skokie,
yeah.
or Melrose Street, and it all seems the same.
It's bizarre. It's very
It really
bizarre.
is. I don't know. Have you come back to in person also or nothing?
Yeah, we're in person. I think we've been in person since July, and just very carefully, very safely, and not everybody. Those who are comfortable, and thank God we've been able to do that safely, no transmission. And had thousands of people, over the weeks getting out of the building, and it's worked
And
out.
do you see the same numbers as you saw before? Do you see more? Do you see less of people
In terms of
coming?
attendance,
Yeah,
before or less COVID, or
yeah, before COVID,
oh, much smaller, much
much
smaller.
smaller.
Yeah, because we're not running our full groups, which is the children's programming. So for a lot of people to come to shul, they have to have a place for their children, and we can't offer. We're starting to offer that outdoors. So it's much smaller. This past Shabbat we had maybe 75 people. Normally we would have had 250 people. So it is smaller.
Yeah, I would imagine. Here's Rabbi Wolkenfeld. It's the name I hear before I came to Chicago, but it's the first time
Yeah.
we are meeting.
Hello, great to meet you. Am I right that you're just down the street, right?
I'm down the street, but as I told Rabbi Hart, there's no. I could have been now in Hawaii, Miami, Jerusalem, or Skokie. The same with these virtual events.
Yeah, nachon, nachon. How is Chicago treating you?
I think it's an amazing city. Really is an amazing city, and I'm really looking forward for things more opening up. And
Yeah,
we're starting now to feel with the great weather. We are starting to feel what the city has to offer. I've
good.
actually been here as a child when I was sick. I was a year in Madison, Wisconsin. I lived, so I had the opportunity to come a few times, and I saw what a dynamic city it is.
Great. Well, I'd love to see you in person when that's possible, and we're glad we're able to have you join
I'd be
us.
happy to. So you can just coordinate. I'm vaccinated, so whenever
Good,
you
me too.
feel.
Thank God. Great, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Can't both do it at the same time.
No,
Rabbi Hart, we have until what time exactly? When do we need to close?
There's no official end time, but I think we said 8 to 9, 9:15.
Okay.
Yeah. Daniel, is that you in the background? Is there like a television or something?
No. Even my baby's not here, so it's quiet.
Hi, Rabbi Goldie.
It's nice to see your faces and your names. Those of you who I know, those who I don't know, that's really Glad you're here.
In the moments before we begin, if you happen to have a candle nearby and wish to light it together with me in a moment, you're invited to find said candle and bring it close to where you are. Okay, welcome everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of us together. This is an opportunity to gather and remember and commemorate Yom HaShoah. We, as a community, as a dual community, have gathered together over the course of this pandemic multiple times to learn, to dance together, remembering those early Zoom Havdalah dance parties, and also to do the more heavier, harder work that we're going to do together tonight to remember. We're also joined, it's a great honor to be joined by staff and counsel from the Israeli consulate here in Chicago. The Council for Public Diplomacy, Daniel Aschheim, is with us tonight, and Rini Schreiber, who handles Jewish communal outreach and media relations, is here with us tonight. And following this TechS, we're actually going to hear a diplomatic update with opportunities for your questions and just hear what everything exciting that's happening in Israel right now, from COVID to peace in the Middle East, to the elections, to all the really exciting things that are happening. So if you wish, stick around after the TechS and you can join Council Aschheim for that conversation. But we're going to begin now by taking time to commemorate Yom HaShoah, something that's so important in these COVID times when life is such a jumble and so easy to get wrapped up in our own struggles and our own day-to-day realities, which are hard and real, but so critical to set aside the time to remember the Shoah, remember its victims, and remember the survivors who are still with us. and that's what we're going to start with tonight. So I'm going to light a candle, and if you have a candle nearby, you're welcome to light it along with me. And we'll sing Ani Ma'amin. And following that, we'll hear some words of Torah from Rabbi Wolkenfeld, and then a Kelmale, and a message from Rabbanit Goldie, and then we'll transition to our program following it with the Israeli Council. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Be'emunah shelema, Beviat HaMashiach, Beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, Ve'af al pi she'yitmameya, Im kol ze ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin. Ani ma'amin, be'emunah shelema, beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, ve'af al pi she'yitmameya, Im kol ze ani ma'amin. Turn it over to Rabbi Wolkenfeld.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Hart, and thank you for enabling our communities to join together this evening. I do feel like I know many of you after the events that we did together over Zoom last spring, and please God, as we've came together under challenging circumstances, as we come together tonight to mourn, may we be able to be together in person, in real life, for celebrations together with our shul communities. I want to invite everyone also as we're sort of getting started tonight to use the chat function and just put the names in the chat box of people whom you're remembering from your own families who you're remembering over Yom HaShoah, parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, cousins perhaps, who died in the Holocaust. Maybe there's maybe a survivor from your family who has died in recent years and you want to remember them as well and hold up their name. Please share with us. I'm going to be speaking, so I can't type and speak at the same time. So I'm just going to list just one relative, my grandfather, one of many I could have listed. So he's there, but please feel free to, as Jennifer did, just to list the relations, but please also list names as well, just so that we can, just as a community, kind of see that as we're talking tonight, we can sort of see those names. In the Torah portion this week, we encounter the story of the death of two sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu. They die unexpectedly and tragically at what should have been a very triumphant moment, the inauguration of the Mishkan. This was the pinnacle of our journey out of Egypt to Sinai, and then to finally have God's presence dwell in the Israelite camp. This is what Aaron was dreaming for and working towards, what Moshe was working towards. And then a horrific tragedy occurred, and Nadav and Avihu are stricken dead. And the Torah records that Aaron's immediate response is silence, Vayidam Aharon, in a way that it seems to be praising his silence. And I think the silence of Aaron in that moment is indicative of a certain type of dignity that sometimes when there's nothing to say, nothing that can be said, it's better to be silent than to say something foolish or something harmful. That sort of carried over into some of our morning rituals. When one goes to make a shiva visit, one doesn't speak, one lets the mourner speak first, right? And too often people feel the need to fill this awkward silence with things that are far, far worse than awkward silence, right? There's v'yidam aron, sometimes silence is okay. And at least this year, okay, as I'm thinking about the Holocaust, as I'm remembering this Yom HaShoah, that message to me seems so wise. The wisdom of Yidam Aron, the ability to be silent, the ability to not say anything rather than fill silence with things that are better not to be said. There's a temptation to confront a crime, a tragedy, an event, a series of events, and as the scale of the Holocaust, and to philosophize and to rationalize and to offer whys and those types of whys and hows, and sometimes those questions are important. I think not for us, not tonight. Not for us. I think, honestly, European Christians are the ones who really have to grapple with the grand philosophical questions of the Holocaust, because they're the ones, their civilization perpetrated it. And so I think it's that raises some like pretty significant questions for them. I think for us, we're entitled to mourn without having to delve into those questions. And I also feel just in the place of the Holocaust in modern Jewish history, like the death of Nadav and Avihu, this culmination of what should have been a celebration, it undermined all of the stories of modern life that we had as human beings, and certainly as Jews, had been telling ourselves that modernity was bringing progress, that scientific advancement would obviously mean human advancement, that learning and intelligence and scholarship made people better, that history was moving towards greater progress and greater freedom and greater tolerance. And we told these stories to ourselves, and we understood ourselves and the world. As we spoke about the Dark Ages, and then we left the Dark Ages behind, and step by step, as a civilization and as Jews within that civilization, as champions of progress and of modernity, we were big believers in that. And I think those stories were disproven by the Holocaust. We tell ourselves stories about survival and how, some of our ancestors managed to survive, some of them the only ones from their families. And those stories too, are, they're every survival is a story of triumph and a story that should be celebrated. But those stories should be celebrated for their own accomplishments, rather than put into frameworks of grander questions, I believe. Thinking of my own family, at the time of the Holocaust, I had ancestors living in America. I had ancestors living in, my father, my grandmother were already living in England. I had ancestors, or I guess cousins of theirs, living in Eretz Yisrael. And I had family in Poland when the Holocaust started, when the war started. And who lived and who died, it wasn't based on who was smart and who was clever and who was brave. Right? Things, right? If the Germans had invaded England instead of Russia, then, then the surviving members of my family would have been different, and the family members would have died, would have been different. If the Germans had managed to reach Palestine, right, then the fate of my cousins in Eretz Yisrael would have been different, and maybe some others would have survived who perished instead, right? It was not because of, there was no justice and there was no rationale. There was a lot of randomness, a lot determined on the decisions of evil people, not on the virtues of good people. So tonight I want to dwell in V'yidam Aharon. Tomorrow I want to dwell in V'yidam Aharon, just the silence of remembering what happened, of honoring the survivors, commemorating the dead, looking at our family trees and the missing branches of our family trees, trying to grapple with the trauma that's still with us, or the inherited trauma for those of us in the next generation. And to realize we live in a world where anything is possible, and with that unsettling feeling. And there'll be, next days for asking the hows and the how can we act to strengthen Jewish life? How can we act to make humanity more humane? And those are important questions and crucial questions. And I'm grateful that you're some of the partners that I have in thinking about those questions. But tonight is for mourning. There's a dignity to that. And the Yidam Aharon, right? Sometimes saying nothing at all and just feeling the pain, allowing it to fill the space is the most appropriate thing we can do. So thank you for remembering with me. Thank you for mourning with me. I'm going to ask Rabbi Goldley to recite a memorial prayer.
Rachamim shochen v'amromim Hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei Ashchina B'ma'alo kedoshim u'torim kizor ki amirim u'asirim L'nishmot achenu b'nei Yisrael hakadoshim v'atorim שנפלו בידי רוצחים ונשפך דמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה ובשאר מחנות השמד באירופה שנהרגו ונשרפו ונשחטו ונקברו חיים לכל מצוות משונות ואכזריות על קדושת השם בעבור שאנחנו בניהם ובנותיהם, אחיהם ואחיותיהם, מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם, בגן עדן מנוחתם. ולכן בעל הרחמים יסתרים בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. Adonai v'nachalatam v'nayanuchu b'shalom v'mishkavam v'nomar Amen. As we take this moment to pause this day to mark and remember the victims of the Shoah, it is also a time that we take as an opportunity to think about the survivors today, their needs, and what we can be doing to support them. I spoke with a member of our community, Ariel Lewis, who is a community leader at Anshe Shalom and also director of resident services and community outreach at the self-help home here, where she's developed deep relationships with residents at self-help who are survivors. She told me how self-help itself was founded by survivors for survivors because they thought they could only depend on themselves. Throughout this previous year, we've all been dealing with isolation, and even more so, survivors. They've had a hard life, and now we're dealing with another difficult period, isolating, hard circumstances. Sometimes they have limited family as well. But Ariel told me how above all, survivors are tough. They are resilient, and their toughness has been a tool for coping with this period of time. Towards the beginning of the pandemic, one resident remarked to her, "I made it through the Shoah, I'll make it through this too." And as our community member, mother of Suzanne in Anshe Shalom, Vera would say, she would say, "I miss my daughter, but we're doing just fine here." Just a marker of the resilience and the toughness of survivors who are among us. And though there are still lots of health-based restrictions and visiting is still somewhat limited, survivors living in a residence, Ariel told me, benefit from daily check-ins from staff, from living in community of their residents. Their spirits are up and they can have family visitors now. They've just started to resume doing Shabbat together, 20 people at a time. And one resident was able recently to meet her great-grandson for the first time. On the other hand, survivors who live on their own have had it harder than those who are living in community. So as we take today to remember victims of the Shoah, we also take the opportunity to remember the needs of the survivors. What do they need? What we've all been yearning for this past year: connection, relationship, support. And adults and kids alike all have the ability to reach out to survivors and also to other nursing home or assisted living residents and their populations to create this kind of connection. Write a letter to a nursing home resident. Make a call to wish someone Shabbat Shalom, to check in, to chat, to get to know them. Send flowers for Shabbat. Ariel told me how kids have sent pictures, drawings, art projects that have so brightened the days of survivors and all the others living in the self-help home. And we can do that as well to involve community members at all ages and stages of life to connect to survivors. In addition, if we're able, they also use iPads or tablets every day in their daily activities at the self-help home, and they're in need of donations of those for daily programming and communications. And so I leave you with this charge to, as we remember those that we've lost, those who were brutally taken from us in the Shoah, to also remember those who have survived and how we can support them, how we can reach out and have the power to connect with them, to build relationship with them, how they have the same needs as us, and as we are enjoined never to forget, that we not forget the care of the survivors of the Holocaust among us.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldie. Thank you, Rabbi Wolkenfeld. Thank you, everyone who was here tonight together to do this work of memory. And we're now going to transition. This is a time period in the Jewish calendar where there's kind of a roller coaster ride of emotions in these days and weeks, and we're maybe compressing them into one evening. The lows of the Shoah and the pain, and the highs of Yom Ha'atzmaut, which we look forward to, and the birth of the state of Israel from the ashes of the Shoah. And so it's fitting tonight, and I think Council Aschheim is going to begin by speaking a little bit about what Yom HaShoah means in Israel, and then expand it to just a broader conversation with everyone here about what's happening in Israel. So it's powerful and fitting that we are moving from our commemoration of Yom HaShoah to learning about Yom HaShoah in Israel, and then understanding and appreciating what Israel means to us in light of the Shoah. So with that, I'm going to introduce formally Council Aschheim. If you want to take a moment to catch a breath or to get a cup of water, feel free to do so. And I'll share his bio. It's a very impressive bio. Daniel Aschheim serves as Counsel for Public Diplomacy at the Consulate General of Israel to the Midwest. He was appointed to this post in September of 2020. And he comes to us from West Africa, where he served as a Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Embassy in Dakar, Senegal. And his portfolio includes media, culture, academic relationships, and the Jewish community in the consulate's 9-state Midwestern region. Big job. Before becoming a diplomat, he was a Jerusalem native. He worked as a director and advisor in the public and NGO sectors. He was a concierge at the King David Hotel in Yerushalayim, and learned many secrets, I'm sure, of US presidents and royalty and celebrities as they spent time there. In Sahel, he served in the 8200 unit, a very prominent and important intelligence unit, which you may know a little bit about. And he has a PhD from Hebrew U in European Studies and a BA in Government Diplomacy and Strategy from the IDC in Herzliya. It's really a great honor to have you with us, Daniel. We're thrilled that you're in Chicago, and we look forward to welcoming you in person to Anshe Shalom, to Skokie Valley, to our communities when it's possible. And tonight, we're really grateful to have you here. And Daniel's going to begin his presentation. And as he's talking, you can type questions in the chat, and then I'll be asking questions from the chat to him. So it's going to be a give and take Q&A. So comments, questions in the chat, and then I will feed them into our conversation over the next 45 minutes or so. So Daniel, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Toda Rabba, Rabbi Hart. Thank you, Rabbi Wolkenfeld. Thank you, Rabbanit Goldie, for this impressive ceremony before. Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure when there's such great weather outside, you had other alternatives tonight. So I appreciate you joining us in the Zoom session. And I do want to continue by saying a few words about the importance of this day by also continuing what Rabbanit Goldie mentioned before. I think this time, the fact that we are now commemorating this still in these black cubes on the computer, of course, it's much better than everyone doing it with himself or herself. But the fact is that I'm living now less than in meters, we are talking about 200 meters behind Anshe Shalom Synagogue and Belmont in my house. And the fact that I haven't met either of you in person is, for me, something that is really missing. And I really hope that we'll be able to see you all in person, that the next presentation will be physically, because it's part of memory. And memory we need to do as a community. And community, we have to be next to each other, feel the other person, talk to the other person, care about the other person. And I think your words, Rabbanit Goldie, really signifies that, caring about the other. A little bit about these days in Israel, as Rabbi Hart said before. True, we are starting today. This marks a very interesting and unique calendar days mostly in the, you can say in the Jewish world, but these are very pure Israeli days. So we start today today's Erev Yom HaShoah. Tomorrow is Yom HaShoah. And then the next events we're talking about is Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day for the soldiers who died in wars and the victims of terrorism. And after that night, we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day. And these are very emotional days. We are starting from this great loss of the Jewish people in the Holocaust, which is commemorated today. And it's something we cannot forget in the history of the state of Israel. So besides the fact that many of the people who came after the Holocaust came to Israel, they also came to the United States, but this is part of the memory of every Israeli today, in the future, and it will remain in our memories. Everyone takes it to their own direction, whether to take it on a personal level, on a collective level, on a country level, on a people's level. But eventually, this is a very important day in the history of Israel, and people mourn it. People sit in schools, in ceremonies, people watch documentaries about it, people celebrate it with their families. There's still those who are still alive, the ones who survived, the second generation, third generation, fourth generation now. And it's very important that we pass it from generation to generation. And we also at the consulate, Rini, who is here today, we arranged together at the consulate an event where we talk the third generation Israeli workers at the consulate talking about our experience as Israelis, third generation, two Holocaust survivors, how it is today and how it's important as a universal message and as a national message for us as the Jewish people. So that's about these days. Now, in a transition, but not exactly a transition, because this is part of the same story. But we're going to talk a little bit, I'm going to try and give you some insights about things that are happening, the hot topics that are relevant today in Israel that people are talking about. But I do encourage you, like Rabbi Hart says, please ask me what is interesting for you. Any topic is fine, from the conflict to peace to Israeli food, COVID, whatever you feel comfortable with, whatever you want to ask, feel free to engage. I want this to be a discussion. I don't want me to only speak. I want to really interact with you. So a little bit about the topics that we'll start. I do want to start with COVID because this is still the most important thing that's discussed around the world. I'm happy to say that if we would have done this presentation 3 months ago, I would have talked completely differently than what I can talk about today regarding the vaccination program, regarding what is happening in COVID. So Israel, in the beginning of the COVID, it looks like years ago, we are only 1 year with this, not only, it feels like decades, but it's 1 year ago, a bit more than 1 year ago. Israel identified the threats that's coming from China, and they're one of the first countries in the world to close its borders. And we are seeing still the implication of that. For I'm sure many of you have relatives in Israel, wanted to travel to Israel. Nevertheless, it was not possible due to the closing of the borders. And Israel, despite identifying it in a very early age and really doing different measures, that we prepared hospitals, we prepared the medical staff, still we saw very high numbers of people who were found positive in COVID. And we also saw a larger number of people who also passed away from COVID. So we're talking about a bit more than 6,000 people, casualties, which is a lot of people for a population of 9 million people. Nevertheless, in proportion to the amount of people who were found positive, it's a rather low number, which means this is an honor badge for our health system. So we had a lot of people with COVID, but the amount of people who died from it is rather low compared to world standards. We did experience 3 rather tough lockdowns, which meant most of the things were really closed. Schools were closed. You could not walk more than a certain mileage away from your homes. So it was pretty tough. So the businesses needed to close down. A lot of people changed their life, their routines. Everything became also or virtual or closed down or in a complete different manner. You could not gather together. Synagogues were closed. Simchas were canceled. Funerals were made via Zoom or very, very limited. So it really changed our lives, very similar to what we also saw in the United States. And then the miracle came. And I'm saying miracle because it's not only a miracle. It was also a strategic decision that was made by the Israeli government and by the Ministry of Health in a very, very early stage. They identified that there's only one way out of this thing. And the one way out of this thing are vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. And what Israel did was sign agreements with a few companies parallel simultaneously, companies that were in the beginning stages of developing the COVID vaccination without knowing at all if there's which one will reach it first. And actually, we did not invest in Pfizer till a very late stage until they announced that they succeeded in the operation. One of the last Western countries to sign with Pfizer. Nevertheless, due to persistence and due to convincing Pfizer that Israel is the best role model, some would say we are the experiment of the world but in a good sense, that Israel is the right fit to start the vaccination program. And by really working together side by side with Pfizer and Moderna, Israel, together with our health system, which is a very interesting model of public health system, which really enables every Israeli citizen, regardless of race, gender, where they live, to get very high level community healthcare. Today in the morning, I was privileged to host at 12 o'clock in the morning. We did an event with Professor Jonathan Alevi, who is he was the general director, now is the president of the Shaare Tzedek Medical Center in Jerusalem, together with Dr. Kevin Smith, the chief medical officer of the Loyola Hospital in Chicago, to discuss managerial dilemmas of COVID. It's part of the series that the consulate is doing. We did an event before with the McLean Center of Bioethics of the University of Chicago, the prominent Israeli professor. We brought together Karen Teitelbaum, the director of the Sinai Medical Center, with the Shamir Medical Center in Israel. So we're working really on the ground in order to build and share knowledge, build bridges between institutions in Chicago and in the Midwest and Israel. So we are now in a situation that we have more than 5 million people out of 9 who are already vaccinated with 1 shot and nearly 5 million with 2 shots. So this means people above the age of 80, we're talking about more than 95% vaccinated already. Most of the people who are not vaccinated are children under the age of 16, which we are still not eligible. And it's not because they're still not doing it, not giving it because they didn't pass the FDA yet approval. So this is where we're at in COVID. And in Israel, they opened up, most of the economy is open. As of 2 days ago, they changed the regulation for non-Israeli citizens, which is good news for most of you probably, that you can come, those who are vaccinated, it's easier. Those who are not, there are certain other limitations, but altogether, the door is open to Israel to come return and come and visit. There are a lot of procedures, bureaucracy, logistics, but it's possible. Things are open now. We need to show a green badge, a green passport that you are vaccinated. You can get into restaurants, hotels, and life goes on. And I'm happy I'm going to be there. I'm really looking forward in 2 weeks going with my baby and my wife, now dog, to Israel to show our parents their grandchild. They saw her when she was 1 month old, and now she's already 11 months old. So it's a different world. So this is what the situation where we are in COVID. We are really looking forward to see this leading to the end of the pandemic all around the world, here in Illinois, here in the United States, in Europe, and all over the world, because we really need this to come behind us. So this is COVID. I'll be happy to answer after any questions regarding that. Another very important topic that we're experiencing in the last few months are the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are game changers, historical agreements, which are true game changers. I don't want to sound dramatic, but it is dramatic. And because of the first topic that I talked about, COVID, the dramatic parts and elements of this one were kind of put aside from various reasons, but there were so many things going on in the world that I don't think they got enough attention. And why is this historical? So the Abraham Accords are the peace agreements signed between Israel, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco, which are leading to a new era in the Middle East. Suddenly Arab countries, and I'll give you an example, I give it every time, Rini, I hope I'm not boring you, but this is still the example I give because I think it's really remarkable. A few years ago, when my wife and I went on a honeymoon, we went to the Maldives, and we wanted, it's phenomenal, highly recommended. And we wanted to stop along the way in a place that's a bit more unique than Europe, that we haven't been to. And we only saw in movies these skyscrapers in the middle of the desert, places that look to us, you can say some would call it Vegas in the desert, some would call it New York in the Middle East, but this Dubai and UAE were places that we could only dream of. And thankfully we had also foreign passports, so we went there, but it said everywhere it's illegal or it's not allowed for people with Israeli citizenship only to enter with an Israeli passport, the UAE and Dubai. And a feeling when you're coming to a place that you're not wanted is not a great feeling. We were a bit scared. It was a nice trip, but eventually to think that only 6 years later, today, the fact is that people are coming. I have 10 friends that I know from Israel who already traveled, are doing work, are doing exchange in the UAE and Dubai. Is phenomenal. And I saw the comment in the chat. I want to respond to that because it's an important point. We had the peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan were really what we know from the book, Peace Agreements Ending War. And they really ended war and changed the way Israel lives. So we had so many casualties from wars with Egypt and Jordan. And the war and the agreements in the end of the 70s and in the middle of the 90s between these two countries really brought an end to war. No more war, they said, and it really ended it. And we built very close strategic and security ties until today. Nevertheless, and this is very unfortunate, these ties remained cold relationship. What does that mean? It means that in Egypt today, it's still illegal. You sit in jail if you translate a book to Hebrew. This is the law. And you're not allowed to do a cultural connection. Yeah, I know you can check it out, but it's true. Cultural connections between Israelis and Egyptians, illegal. So, and this is also part of consensus, but it's also part of the law. Or sometimes it's not an official law, but sometimes it comes from the guilds, which are the organizations of the journalists and it's part of their mechanism. So when we're looking at that, and then we saw here, something that was built, it was a lot of work of diplomats along the years. So from the 90s, the diplomats, Israeli diplomats with their diplomats working on agreements behind the scenes. Now they're outside, they're public, and it's great. But what we are seeing here are signatures signing between the leaders. So we are seeing here true leadership. So we can say everyone can have their own opinion, completely legitimate, what you think about Prime Minister Netanyahu or former President Trump or Kushner or the leaders of these Arab countries. Nevertheless, this was a truly courageous leadership decision, chemistry between leaders, and work done behind the scenes for many, many years. And what we saw here was the official agreements, and signing MOUs, memorandum of understandings, are always great for it's good for the photo op, it's good for the press, but a lot of times they remain on the surface or theoretical. And here we saw that the first meetings after the signatures were director generals of the ministers from both sides. So the Ministry of Culture, Higher Education, Water, Technology, everything one could imagine they're already built. So tourism connection, cultural connection, economic, innovation. We're already seeing trilateral cooperation between America, UAE, Dubai, and Israel. We'll see this is tremendous opportunity also to come. We're already seeing this there. It's not only something maybe in the future, we're already seeing agreements signed with Israeli companies. There are investments coming in, investments going there. It's a great opportunity also for the Muslim population in Israel, the Arab Israelis, who opening another horizon of Arab speakers and tourism. It really has amazing, amazing potential. And I really hope this is going to be only the beginning. And as President Biden and Secretary Blinken mentioned, this is also in their agenda. So we're looking forward to working together with the new administration on opening more and building more peace agreements with other neighbors, including our Palestinian neighbors, maybe other countries in the region and further away places. So that's regarding the Abraham Accords. And the last, of course, but not least thing that's happening now is the Israeli balagan called elections number 4. And this truly is one big balagan. And why is it a balagan? Not only because we are not seeing in the near future any way to build a long-term sustainable, consensual, and form a coalition which is homogeneous enough, or even if it's not homogeneous, people joining together and sitting on a joint agenda, very hard to do, as well as what we are seeing now is the fact that it's not anymore a discourse between right and left, not anymore discussions between ideology, what do you have, two-state solution, annexation, or whether it's connected to economy, a socialist economy, liberal economy. This is not the discourse anymore. These elections now were, in other words, were referendum. Are you for the continuation of Prime Minister Netanyahu? Are you not for the continuation of Prime Minister Netanyahu? And neither sides have a clear majority again. Eventually, when you have 4 elections in 2 years, the people don't change that often. So people are born, people die, but it's 2 years. So you can try it again, but probably the results will be the same. So, and the sad part is that we could very much be towards the 5th elections. Nevertheless, the situation currently is that as of yesterday, President Rivlin gave Prime Minister Netanyahu the mandate to try and form a coalition. He needs to come within 28 days to show that he has a majority that can approve this coalition. And if not, the president can give the mandate to any other politician that he thinks has the higher chance, or return it to the Knesset, to the parliament, to choose the candidate. And what we are seeing here there are 2 parties who one needs to mention especially. One of them is called the Yemina. The used to be the religious Zionist, modern Orthodox party. Now there are right-wing, half religious, half not religious. It's called Yemina, which means right. And they are to the right of Netanyahu in many ideological things. But he did not, and they got 7 mandates, 7 places in parliament out of 120. So relatively small, but they have a lot of power now of deciding who will get the mandate, because they didn't say that they will sit with Netanyahu or will not sit with Netanyahu before the election. Therefore, both sides are trying to gain their support. And what we saw now also of Bennett, who is the leader of this party, he might also be the Prime Minister of Israel with 7 mandates if Prime Minister Netanyahu does not win it, as a compromise candidate that the other side will acknowledge. It's going to be fascinating to see how it will be from the left to the right, sitting all together with the center. It's going to be very interesting if that works. On the other hand, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is very hard for him forming coalition, because the second party we are talking about, and this is true history in Israeli politics, this is the first time ever in Israeli political history that an new Arab party, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, not less than that. So the religious Arab Muslim party, which is called Ra'am, the Joint Arab Party, they split from the Joint Arab General Party, which was before, was the Joint List, and they split by claiming, guys, ladies and gentlemen, we are no more in anyone's hands. We are not going to speak ideology now for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. What we want and demand, equality, budgets. We are asking to fight against crime in the Arab world, in the Arab sector in Israel. And what we are seeing here is phenomenal, because this is the first time that no one knows what's going to happen, and they're suddenly talking about legitimization. Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about being an active or inactive part of the coalition. It's still done behind the scenes, but this is published. But the reason why, and he wants to go, the Arab Party would go with the right. Nevertheless, what we are seeing is that the most right-wing party, the religious Zionists they're called, are saying, no way are we going to work together with this party. This means in practice that Netanyahu will not have a chance to build a coalition. So very complicated, very complex, very balagan, very problematic, and we'll see. And this is really going to be the future for the next few years. One has to see how to build a stable coalition government. So these are the three hottest potatoes and hottest topics now. I'll be happy to answer any question about any topic that you are interested in.
Daniel, a question came in about the last topic, and specifically the last point on the last topic about the religious Zionist party. And the question came as follows. For about 60 years, I've considered myself a, quote, religious Zionist. How am I to process the fact that a party with just that name, made of racist Kahanists, has now been elected to the Knesset? And even more than that, may be included in a coalition government. So she's referring to, you can explain the presence of Kahanist elements in that party, and the distressing nature of that, and how, what your take on that is.
So it's a very interesting topic. This topic, what you just mentioned now, and the one who asked the question, is very relevant to the discourse currently in Israel. Why is it relevant? Because there were a lot of discussions amongst, when you read also the press of the modern Orthodox, it's hard for me to say modern Orthodox, because what you consider in America modern Orthodox is different than what it's considered in Israel, but I'll use that term to define them. So the Zionists, the religious Zionists or the modern Orthodox have the most, I would say, members in parliament that they ever had, but most of them not from sectorial parties, which is very important to point out, because people tend to say, okay, this is the religious Zionist party with that name. Are all the religious Zionists or all the modern Orthodox or all the Orthodox, which are not ultra-Orthodox, they vote for them. But then you also have in the Likud many religious Zionists or modern Orthodox. You have in the Yesh Atid, in the centrist party. You also have in the Labor Party, and you also have in other parties from all the spectrum. You have it in the Gantz blue and white party. You have people with the kippah who consider themselves proud religious Zionists. Now, it's true that inside the discourse there, as a collective, we don't see many different voices, even though there are many voices in the religious Zionist groups in Israel. Those who live in Ra'anana have different views than those who are Givat Shmuel, who have different views than those who are in Baka, who have different views. And I'm sure you know it, because I know a lot of you have very close ties with Israel. I heard Rabbi Wolkenfeld's name from a close friend of mine from Jerusalem, who is a modern Orthodox who votes for the left. So, I mean, there are lots of different people here, and I think it's the job of those from that community to decide what they want to be and what their image should be. I think it's something that every party, I think is you as a voter, you as a religious leader, you as a spiritual leader, not you, Rabbi Hart, but you one who votes to any party that he chooses. There's a responsibility to that, to the collective, because they are representing so-called the religious Zionists. So there's those who claim that they are bringing in, as you mentioned before, the more extreme elements connected to, some of them were students of Rabbi Kahana, some of them are in different places. Nevertheless, it's a mixture of different groups. And And parliament has to accept the extremists from both sides, even though many do not like to accept it. And therefore, it also shows the problematic aspects of forming coalitions, because a lot of people say we are not going to sit together with the religious Zionist party because they have elements of Kahana. Therefore, we are not going to legitimize it also if they would accept sitting with us. And you see this constantly. So one side says it on the Arab parties, the Arab party says it on the right says it on the right, between the right, and there are many things. The ultra-Orthodox don't want to sit with Lapid because they claim, and Lieberman doesn't want to sit with the ultra-Orthodox. It's a balagan, and I'll give the example. I don't know how many of you are aware of the Jews in Afghanistan. And as of a few years ago, there were 2 Jews left in Afghanistan. One was about 100, the other one was 92. They both had 2 different synagogues, didn't speak to each other, and that's how the community ended. So I don't want to say this is our fate. I hope it will not be our fate, of course, but it does show you that sometimes so many opinions about so many things and so many fragmentation, so many different polarization that we're experiencing is definitely not something good for the future. It's fine to have disagreements. It's legitimate. It's very good for vibrant democracy. Nevertheless, you can see the split is becoming wider and wider. And we really hope that it's going to get a bit more stabilized in the near future.
Just to follow up, you mentioned, Knesset has to hold and the extremes, but there is a limit in Knesset, right? The Kahanist party was banned. Kach was banned by I think it was by the Knesset. Am I correct?
No, by
that?
the Supreme Court.
By the Supreme Court. Okay. Right. So, is there a limit? Do you, I don't know how much you can give your personal opinion. I mean, you're a diplomat, so you have to be very diplomatic, but is there a limit?
No, there's definitely a limit, and it's written in the law. So the law is very clear about that. The law says someone who objects for the Jewish and democratic state, someone who supports violence and terrorism, and there are very clear clauses in this law. And what happens is every year, every election, there are the process of the committee of politicians who claim that the other party should be banned because they are violating one of these rules. And then what happens is it goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has a policy that they need to be very, very careful and minimal who they say that cannot run, because they claim we need to bring a voice for also for the extremists, as long as they do not actively support terrorism or violence against the other and do not accept a Jewish or democratic state. And you see they were very, 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 I would say, careful with that, because every time it becomes a politicized game, the right says that the Arab members of parliament should be banned. They are banned in this committee. Then it goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says, no, they can come in, and it goes back and forth. Actually, from this party, we know Itamar Ben-Gvir is one of the members of the Zionist party, religious Zionist party. His colleague before was banned a few years ago when he tried to run, so he could not do it. So Baruch Marzel, and you have Benzi Gopstein. So a few from that segments were banned. He specifically, who is considered one of the most right extremists there, he was not banned because he also showed in court that he does not support any violence. He's not for anything, for any expulsion. He says those who are, and again, any criticism about that I can completely understand why saying this, he or she should not be there. But I think then it's too easy to put the responsibility on a Supreme Court. And I think it's the individual's responsibility to vote for people who believe in the human being and believe in not extreme positions. That's my personal thought. But I think it's really the person's responsibility. And if we see an X amount of people voting for an X party, it means they have representation. They are there. So if the Supreme Court shuts these voices, it doesn't mean they're gone. It just means that you'll see them in different places and not in parliament. So sometimes it's good to have in parliament to know who is there, and sometimes it also moderates those in party. But yes, I think everyone is entitled to their opinion. What is extreme? What is included in extremism? That those who are really every year says the Arab parties should be banned because they're extremists and do not support the Jewish state. So here also, should they be banned because of that, or should we give the opportunity for those who believe in that? So it goes to right and left.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like, back to the question about the religious Zionists, that there may be a political party called religious Zionists, but I think everyone who's on this call or most of us would probably identify as religious Zionists. It may be up to us and our brothers and sisters in Israel to make sure that our understanding of what religious Zionism means is strong and is represented in the public sphere, not to cede that to an extremist.
I agree. I think it's important for you to have influence. Yeah, the better. The more, the better.
A much easier, an easier but also more difficult question. When will we be able to go to Israel? Will travel restrictions lighten up? Do you have any secret insights into ease of travel into Israel by this summer?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the beginning, so as of 2 days ago, the regulations have changed dramatically. So this leads to the possibilities of most of the people who are vaccinated and have relatives in Israel to fly. You can fly tomorrow. So you just need you need to pass to the consulates to get permissions, and there are a lot of regulations, but you can find it, you can Google it and find the regulations of how to get in, but it's eased dramatically. 3 days ago, it was not possible. As of 2 days ago, the borders have officially opened for non-Israelis as well, and it's not anymore in very unique cases, but they expanded it dramatically. So I hope by the summer it will be much easier as well, with much less bureaucracy involved. But it's possible today with bureaucracy, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, and a question about the Emirates. I guess it's a question about the ethics of regimes which are very questionable in their treatment of minorities and of foreign workers and other not good policies and taking of human life. What does it mean to you as an ambassador? Is it okay to be developing these relationships with these countries that have some darker sides to them?
Look, this is always a question that people are talking realpolitik, morality, what is more important? So I think that if we look in the international arena, it's not our responsibility when we build partnerships around the world to discuss. This is truly domestic policies of foreign workers coming in. Of course, on a personal and human level, I would want everyone to get the best equal treatment possible, that they will get all their rights, that they will be treated as equals. Nevertheless, if we would start banning according to, and will not build relationship according to specific policies, some would say the fact that one country doesn't have freedom of press, does that mean that we will not be able to sign agreements with them? So I was serving in Africa, as I said before, responsible for 5 countries in the region. So we can start saying every country, we don't believe in. Senegal, for instance, is a 95% Muslim country, rather stable, and it's rather democratic in African standards. Nevertheless, it's legal to marry 4 wives. That's the law. So we can ask ourselves, is it fine? Is it part of our morality? And then comes really philosophical question, does social change mean changing others? Who are we to say? This is also the things you study in university also, whether relativism or who is it to say what is better or not? So of course, when it's discussing violation of certain human rights, we are all against it, and we should condemn it on a general and humanistic level as human beings. But I think in the geopolitics, when we're talking about bilateral agreements, we need to make sure we are signing. Of course, there's a limit to of course, if we would be seeing countries that are murdering their citizens, or countries that are acting in very, very problematic manners, it would be something to discuss, definitely, of course. I'm not saying we are giving a carte blanche, but when we are talking about domestic policies of labor laws of a different country, I think that we need to work with the leadership and with the different segments and sectors of the population there to build sustainable long-term partnerships on the various fields, which are win-win to all the population, the living there, the citizens, the foreign workers, and more.
To that, I'll ask a question of my own. I have friends in Israel who have been from the religious Zionist community who have raised a voice of Torah concern about not bilateral agreements, but the selling of weapons to specifically to Myanmar. Here in Chicago, actually, we have a large Rohingya community, and there's a deep concern, especially now with the military takeover, that those weapons are being used for very wicked things. And I know there's been some conversation in Israel about policies of who Israel sells its defense technology to. Can you just share where those conversations are at, and if there's been any changes in those policies over the last couple of years?
So the Israeli official policy regarding this it was also transformed and changed with the years, mostly because of an incident we had with the United States of America with something that was sold to China and India. There were some certain points, and that was the time when we defined exactly which kind of arms deals you can do, which kind of sharing information to which countries. It needs to pass committees in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And there we also give the humanitarian aspect, whether we think a certain country is violating human rights based on the UN and based on other sources that we have. The Ministry of Defense need to see it. So there's a few different committees before any arms deals is done, also on the private level. This is also important to emphasize, not only government, but also if there is a private company that wants to work, they need to pass a very strict legal process to do it. Nevertheless, of course, there are certain times and incidents that we work with many countries, and sometimes it does happen that a certain country does things that we didn't expect in advance that they will happen, and there are also shifts in regimes. We never know. We also had very close ties with Turkey. For many years, Turkey is part of NATO, and still Erdogan decided to arrest hundreds of thousands of people. So you can say also, why is the whole world working with Turkey when this is done? So there are different things, but actively Israel will not sell in the middle of an arms conflict in order to help someone when we know it's used against civilians or used against any bad goals. Will not do it. And therefore there are a lot of different systems to try and provide it. Of course, sometimes we have different things happening in different parts of the world, but we hope they will not happen.
Thank you. Curious what you've been up to here in Chicago. What's the situation on the ground? What does it look like to be the council of, with your portfolio in a COVID time? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we came here in September, and after the birth of my baby was in Israel in the middle of COVID. We came from Senegal. We barely left before they closed the borders there. We came dramatically. It was all like the Exodus, it felt. We came for the birth to Israel. Then my wife visited her family in Europe. Then I flew. We met in the airport after not seeing each other with a baby for 2 months, directly to Chicago. We landed here. And then I came into a world that I didn't know before, world of computer screens. And I'm a person of people, and diplomats, our job as diplomats is reaching out, is building connections, building ties face to face. And this was a true challenge because we came into a place that the numbers were higher. We had regulations, very strict regulations in the consulate to make sure that no one gets sick and no one is getting in touch with anyone who can be sick. And this was really, truly, truly challenging. But nevertheless, we tried to build a routine, a personal routine, and most importantly, a professional one. And today, this is actually my 4th presentation to a group today from the morning. So this has been a very productive day. I spoke, for instance, today, we started the day, I spoke to the vice president of the Notre Dame University in Indiana. Then we did the event of where I told you, which was a public event with Loyola and Shaare Tzedek. I spoke to the Stevenson High School with the Hebrew Honor Society. And yesterday I had an event with another synagogue. So we're having various events that we are hosting, we are arranging, we're doing outreach, and it's very, very important for me as a mission. I see really building bridges and ties between the Jewish community, the liberal, progressive, modern Orthodox, anyone you want to consider, building bridges between Israel and them. And I really think that this is a vital thing for the future of the state of Israel and for the viability of the Jewish communities abroad. And a lot of times it's forgotten by both sides. And therefore, what I'm doing day and night is to really promote this bridge building and everything possible, and also bringing Israel to the Midwest and Midwest to Israel, economic ties, cultural ties, a press, politicians, and all of the things that we can, academic relationship that we can do.
That's a lot. We wish you a lot of atzlacha. It's a big job, and it's very needed here. We have time for one, maybe a final question. Anybody want to put something in the chat, or if not, Daniel, if you want to just offer a final concluding thought or message to us as we transition, in Yom HaShoah, but are looking ahead to Yom HaAtzmaut and thinking about our relationship with Israel, thinking about travel to Israel this summer. I'm personally, it's a very relevant question to me. I'm a member of a program that meets in Israel, and we didn't meet last summer, and we don't know what's happening this summer. So as Israel is more and more on our minds, if you want to leave us with any final thoughts.
I want to leave you with an optimistic note. I want to really be optimistic and say that I have the feeling, the gut feeling. My gut feeling is not based on science, it's based on Daniel. And I think we are getting towards better days here in Israel, and that things will calm down, and hopefully not, I want to say Bashana Haba, but I hope Bashana Azot, this year in Yerushalayim. I'm actually going in 2 weeks to Israel, as I said, and I'm really excited, and it's going to be a different experience than what we knew before. The world changed, but I hope it will go back. So it looks to me, from what my friends are telling me, my family is telling me, things are looking pretty normal now. And unless there'll be a variant or something that will break it, looks like we're in the right direction, and you'll all be able to travel and see Israel again, visit your relatives. You mentioned I was a concierge at the King David. I'm sure some of you were guests there or friends there, so probably we met sometime in our days. And that's beautiful places to visit, beautiful people to meet, interesting, fascinating discussions to do. I'm sure you'll do it. And until then, I'll hopefully meet you soon here in Chicago if we don't meet in Jerusalem.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and being with us as we remember Yom HaShoah, and then just informing us and engaging with us in these really important ways. And it's a great zchut. Thank you to Rini, who made tonight possible. Thank you to the Anshe Shalom and Skokie Valley communities who came out and joined us for this. And Daniel, we look forward to many more opportunities to collaborate together, and Rini and with the consulate. It's a wonderful relationship, and we are very grateful for all the very important work that you do in Chicago, in the Midwest, in the 9 states that you are responsible for. And just thank you, and everyone wishing you a meaningful Yom HaShoah. Please continue to hold the Shoah in your thoughts over the next 25 hours. Watch a film, go to a program, call a survivor, talk to family. It's so important that we never forget, especially now. And wishing everyone a wonderful Yom HaAtzmaut when it comes. We look forward to it, and we look forward to celebrating as communities again. So thank you.
Thank you. Toda rabah.
Everybody. Bye.